Well, let's go back a step. The Holocaust, of course, was already
Make sure we can hear it.
right speak into it. Thank you very much. Okay.
I'll just say, Terrence asked
I'm
about,
speaking to Terrence, and I want to speak to you also. Okay. Of course, the Holocaust was already going on, unfortunately, in the 30s in Germany. And basically a lot of the, not only the Jewish people, but they were actually going after also Catholic priests, but mostly the Jews. Okay, and what we heard about it mostly was Kristallnacht, 1939, when they really started plundering the Jews. But even before that, German Jews had been coming to Holland. And of course, my family was living in Holland. Very fortunately, Holland had been totally neutral in World War I. And never expected that Germany would have attacked them or they had anything to do with that, because the German Kaiser came to Holland and lived there. And many German orphans were taken in for foster homes. So that in early 1940, not everybody, some people had already tried to leave Holland expecting it, but most of it, including my family, was relatively surprised that in the early 40s, Germany started bombing Rotterdam, a big port. So the Allies couldn't use it. And then the parachutes came in. And then really the end of the story for Holland was that in the Grebbeberg, which was on the border, Holland's proud army held for 5 days, but the German Wehrmacht ran right over them. Okay. From then on, many of you who read the story of Anne Frank realized that the Germans were slowly taking away any rights that the Jews had. Of course, my family was living there too. And first we saw that the Dutch princess, Juliana, was sent to Canada for safety, and that was a real show that things were going to get worse. And then the Dutch queen, Wilhelmina, she left for England to take the Dutch government there. And that was really the sign that the Dutch government had no longer control what was going in the country and was time to leave. But you couldn't just hop a plane to the United States or any place, the country was closed. And people stayed there and it got worse. And then rumors started coming around that there was a way out in a small shipping town called Scheveningen. Can you say Scheveningen? Go ahead.
Scheveningen.
Yeah, that was the code word, which we knew was German and not. Okay, in Scheveningen, that there was a chance to leave. Up to this day, I don't know, because it's from hearsay. Was this a German trick or was it real? Anyway, people started leaving for Scheveningen. And there are two harbors in Scheveningen, the new one and the old one. And in the new one, people were told there were boats that could take them to England. And on the way, there's a crossroad, and in the split, there was a person dressed, and again, this is hearsay, I was a baby, I was only 9 months old, okay, who were directing traffic. And my father, in Europe, you listen to accents very carefully, did not trust the man's accent, thought that he was working with the Germans, and we went to the Old Harbor. Okay, in the Old Harbor, by luck, my parents got us aboard a wooden fishing, it was just a fishing boat that normally goes out to the North Sea but never goes to England. So we got aboard that boat, and it was lucky, it was a wooden boat. Why was that lucky? Because basically the harbors were mined to prevent the Germans from coming in, and metal boats unfortunately didn't make it. Okay, now I still don't know for sure if the ones leaving from the new harbor, the people on board, if that was a trick or not, but all those boats were blown up and everybody died. Okay, so we made it to England in this small boat. And before we left, there were a couple of things happening also, is that you'll notice a brand new car, my father's brand new car, was dumped in the ocean because the license plate would have told what happened to the family and that would have endangered them. So the brand new car is spoiled somewhere in the ocean there. Shall we go look for it? No. Okay. Arriving in England, of course, the English were worried about spies coming in. I might look like a spy, a 9-month-old spy, but unfortunately at that time my name was Hans. And Hans is a Dutch name, very Dutch, but also German. So that they had a list, very bureaucratic. Anybody on the list with German-sounding names would be held. So basically my mother was a 9-month-old baby, was held up with the baby, and we could not really get clearance to enter. Luckily, her family had left prior to the German invasion, actually prior to things starting in Germany, and they were living in England. I was very lucky. So my mother's second oldest brother was a lawyer, and he came down, and of course, after the war, he teased me with his hat. In a very British accent, he said, the young baby's name is not Hans, it's Harold. And you all read. And being that he was very English, we went and we were able to stay for about half a year with my grandparents in their apartment. Unfortunately, many of you might have read that the bombing of Britain, with all the bombs falling, well, it became rather uncomfortable. And my parents decided that they really would rather go, but you couldn't go to the States, couldn't anyway. But anyway, they found a passage on a boat. There were ships going back and forth between England and Canada. They were bringing in land lease from the United States and going back empty. And going back empty, there was a possibility of passengers. So we got off board that thing, and saying we, nobody consulted me, okay? I was a baby, all right? So we left for Canada. We arrived in Canada, and as that goes with Jewish families, you know people all over the world. You have not only relatives, but anybody you know is family. So we lived with the Solomons for a while. Unfortunately, again, you could not stay in Canada. You could be there for a couple of months, but you couldn't get what we would call a permit to stay, not work. So basically, you had to go, that heard that my mother's eldest brother had also left London because of the bombing, but had found his way to Jamaica. And he said that it was possible to come. So my parents decided to go from Canada to Jamaica. We just don't hop a train. So it took a while to get to Jamaica. Havana was full of Germans. Nassau Bahamas was also not that safe. But we finally made it to Jamaica. And basically that's actually my first starting to remember from what is hearsay. People told me the story over and over. To what I really started remembering was probably someplace in Jamaica. But again, in Jamaica, they would let people stay. But you couldn't work, you couldn't do anything. So basically, the object was to get to Dutch territory. Because Dutch territory, my father was Dutch. And then we finally, from Jamaica, managed to get to Curaçao. Curaçao was at that point 100% Dutch. So we finally went to Curaçao. And then when people ask me, where did you spend the war? I have to say, on the beach in Curaçao. Of course there was some war going on. We did have a blackout at nights. There were submarines that apparently tried to bunker from the gas. There were certain things, but basically it was a good place to be. And later on from Curaçao, we were there till 1949, went to Aruba, still not being able to get to the United States, not possible. And finally in Aruba, again coincidences, we were living in Aruba, and one of our almost neighbors was the American consulate. And my father, his friend, told him he was worried that the boys for their education could not get it in what you called, and that they have to go back to Holland, but my mother did not want to go live back in Holland. Okay, so the consul said, why don't you go to the States? And my father said, we've been trying to for now 11 or 12 years, it's not working. And he said, no? Well, come to my office tomorrow and we'll see about that. So that's when in 1952 we got our papers through this consulate, and that's why I wound up in the United States.
So,
Also trying to talk to you about a question.
Well, you've answered like half of them.
Yeah, of course. I warned him about that, but you weren't listening. Go ahead. Help your sister.
Parents, you answered them. What about? We've heard that it's hard for other people to talk about it, like other Holocaust survivors. So, how do you feel about talking about it?
Well, obviously you hear me right now. I don't tell the story too much, but basically certain people keep asking me about it, and then I agree to. But yeah, one of the things basically I can best explain about people not wanting to talk about, and it's not often mentioned. I saw it a lot. I'll get to that later. We went back for the first time to Holland in 1946 and 46, and that's for the first time where you meet family who've changed their name. Okay, and as a little boy you understand, well, how come you, both cousins, you have different names? Okay, and it turns out, yes, those families did not want to discuss, they don't want to be Jewish anymore, want anything to do, and they're fearful of it. So basically, and even up to today, I meet people whose name has been changed, that they don't want to talk about it, don't want anything to do with it, and basically the fear will be there forever.
So, did you have any family members or friends that played important roles in the Holocaust?
As a matter of fact, one stands out. Many, of course, of the family that didn't make it out of Holland were hid. And I think that all the people that hid them are great heroes in my mind, okay? But one that stands out was a cousin of my father, okay? He was living in Belgium, okay? He was married to from a lady who was what they call White Russian. She was not Jewish. As such, she could stay in Belgium, and with her papers and everything, there was no problem. Except his name was Benno Necker, and he decided that he was capable of setting up a route from Brussels to the Swiss border. And he had people that were hid in Belgium, even some coming in from Holland, and he brought them from safe house to the Belgian border, and then into Switzerland. He was in Switzerland many times and came back again. And on the fourth, it might have been the fifth time, they warned him that basically the Germans knew about this route. But he had a whole bunch of people waiting, and he said, I got to take this much, and they got him that time. So I think of all the heroes, he's the number one. Okay, then basically, if you want to, well, I'll tell you about Irene. I had with me a book. You want to talk about Irene? Okay, I'll talk about Irene. Basically, I brought with me a book for the rabbi. It's written by Dr. Irene Butler, who happens to be, there it is, okay, who happens to be a friend of us in Michigan. Well, what happens is most of you read the book Anne Frank. Okay, Anne Frank was 2 years older than Irene. She knew her, went to the same school. They were picked up at about the same time and went to Westerbork, which was sort of like the holding camp in Holland, where they thought they were going to be held till the end of the war, which it wasn't anyway. Anyway, from Westerbork, where she was at the same time as Irene, they went to Bergen-Belsen. And in Bergen-Belsen, she was with Anne Frank. And only Anne Frank could write up to the fact that they were taken in. Irene got a chance. The Lord gave her that chance to write the book after the war. So Irene's story goes all through the war, through Bergen-Belsen and the camps, and the miraculous story that because her father had in Holland applied for false passports to go to South America, they were exchanged for Germans who were held in Texas as an exchange student. As state students, they were not students, they were just normal people living there, called Crystal City. Okay, and then because after the war she was repatriated, separated from her family. Unfortunately, her father died in the camps, but the book is a global description of in the camps. It's not an easy read, but it's where Anne Frank left off. You got more notes for me, go ahead.
Looking back on the Holocaust, what were your thoughts?
Well, one, of course, that it's very tough to say. If the Holocaust happened, would I be an older man living in Holland right now, under German control, or would I not be here at all? So, it's anybody's guess.
Can you describe the first time your family reconnected after the war?
Yeah, basically that was quite an event. It was for the first time actually. My father went back at the moment Holland was freed, and it took a long time. We had the Hunger Winter. I don't know if you've all read about that, where Holland thought they were free and they weren't, and that took a long time. But finally, they were freed, and he got on the tanker and went back to Holland to see what was left in there and what family. Unfortunately, we did know that most of his family, all of his family, and not on my mother's side, but his father's side, died in Bergen-Belsen, where Irene was there. She knew part of my family. Why did we know that? In that the company before the war was an agency for a Swiss company, and they communicated so that my grandmother, who was still in Holland, would give messages to the office would send them to the Swiss factory who could send it to the United States to my father. So there was some communication there. The communication ended very abruptly when there was a note saying the mice are starting to nibble at the floor. And suspected that she'd been given away, we don't know. Okay, but then the good part, humanity has a lot of good people too. When my father went back in 1946 to see what was left, he went up there and there was a gentleman there, a big industrial, Dutch industrial, for what was then in Holland a big conglomerate. And what happened was that my grandmother, before she hid, persuaded this gentleman to take all the shares of the company and take ownership to save the company from being taken by the Germans, so that the people could still be employed and the company would not be taken over. He did. He was very good to the people because he had a big company. The Germans did not fool with him too much, so he had extra coal and food, and the people in my father's company had the benefit of that. So after the war, my father went back and he met with the gentleman, and my father said, you know, and he said, well, it's your company. My father said, well, I want you to hold at least half the shares. I mean, you brought it through and they're legally yours. And he said, that's not the way we do things in life. And he stayed with us as on the board of directors. That's all he ever wanted. So there are some good people in this world who we should not forget. Okay, all right. Then, when did we first meet? Well, in 1947, we flew from Curacao in the DC-9. You wouldn't call this an airplane, but it really was, to New York. That was splendid, a big city, big yellow cabs, lots of orange shoes, well-dressed people. When you come from an island, that was really great. But from there we went on to England to meet my grandparents. That's the first time we saw the family. And after that we went to Holland. And then you could see the real scars left in Holland. What happened was that when we arrived in Holland, we were staying in a hotel, the Victoria Hotel, which is right off the big railroad station. And my brother and I were playing outside on the sidewalk. And the doorman said, there's a gentleman standing there, but when he comes up to you, you're not allowed to speak to him. Not allowed to speak to him, why not? And the gentleman kept looking at us, and he kept at us, and the doorman said, no, go away. So later on, I was a little bit older, I think it was about 2-3 years later, that I asked him, who was this gentleman that tried to speak to us? And my father admitted that was his driver before the war, Mr. Lodewijks, who had never done anything wrong, except for the fact that his son had cooperated with the Germans, and nobody wanted to have anything to do with the family ever again. That's how deep the scars were.
How has the Holocaust affected you today?
Well, let's say we hope it affects you a little bit as to the way you treat other human beings. Okay, one of the things what we all thought when the war ended, this was the end. But as we look around now, we have more refugees in the world than ever before, and maybe you try to understand a little bit what it's like for a refugee or stranger to land in your land. And then sometimes we have some groups in Ann Arbor, we try to do something for the people arriving.
Do you have any final words about the Holocaust?
We thought it was the end of the refugee problem, but I'm sorry to say it was not. Okay. You have another question? You've been very silent. You're just listening? Okay. Alrighty. Well, first of all, let me say what does it mean to be. Let me say that it's a great pleasure to be here. There's two grandchildren sitting here being able to tell the story. Thank you for letting me do that.
Please, thank you. Thank you. Yes,
Questions?
please.
I have a question. So your father's parents stayed or went to England, or they stayed in Holland in hiding?
Okay. My father's parents were that. My father's father had already passed away before the war. Okay. His mother stayed for two reasons. One, she was not totally convinced that people couldn't stay. Second, my father's sister, her daughter, and two kids were somewhere in the north of Holland, and I don't want you to smile, practicing to be farmers to go to Israel. So unfortunately, they were picked up. They were in first to Westerbork and then to Bergen-Belsen, And she, when she was picked up, I don't know if she ever met up with her daughter. They were both in the same camp. And when we ended the war, got the official notification that we're in families, the Red Cross is the only notification you get. They gave the death certificate as both at the same time. And it was the same place. If they ever actually met in that big camp, I don't know.
And your mother's family?
Well, my mother's family basically had left much of a, were already in England. My grandparents were living in England. Her two brothers were living in England. My mother's youngest brother was hit. His best friend was half Jewish, so the mother hid him all during the war. Okay, in a place which I saw after the war was right under the stairs, but they got away with it. And the other brother was in the German army, the Dutch army, and of course the Dutch army didn't hold very long, so he was a prisoner of war. And there again, it's a nice thing we might say about the Dutch army. What happened, they got care packages which were delivered half, and they got boots, only one, but everybody suffered. But then one day, as reveille early in the morning, he tells it, the entire group was said to come stand in reveille, and they said, will the Jew, Hans Vandenberg, step forward? And the entire regiment stepped forward. So he made it.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure, sir.
When the Germans came into Holland, did they destroy the synagogues and Jewish businesses?
Well, basically it went two ways. They came in, and the first thing started by the restricting. You couldn't do this, you couldn't do that. Finally wearing the Jewish star, okay? They did start taking over Jewish businesses. They did not destroy either the Sephardic synagogue or the other one on the other side. If you go to Amsterdam, no, they didn't destroy the Sephardic. Well, it's still there. It's still there with the gaslit lamps. And on high holidays, we still wear tuxedo on high holidays in the Sephardic one. Across the street are the ones from the people from the East, the Ashkenazi, or what you call it. And right next to it is a Jewish historical museum. But none of those buildings were destroyed.
So Kristallnacht didn't affect Holland?
Not in the way that they went and they plundered things. And I don't think, now I'm guessing, I don't think it could have happened quite that much. Because you have to see, especially Amsterdam had a close knit of working class Jews and working class Gentiles. They were living next to each other. So when they went into the sections to round up Jews, there was a great deal of resistance of people, and many non-Jews were picked up because of that. People volunteering to hide people. Okay, and that's quite a step. Okay, it was one of these things where they had so integrated that even today in Amsterdam, many of the expression like Mayim, Yaim, and everything else are quite normal. They've taken it over in the vocabulary. I think because of that close relationship, you couldn't have had the plundering. Because unfortunately, they had to say in Germany, the plundering in the Kristallnacht were only German soldiers. They were mobs. And that didn't happen in Holland.
Well, I know we are all exceedingly grateful to Harold, to his grandchildren, to his wife Jen and his daughter and son-in-law, and we are so very grateful that you have made the trip and have shared with us. I know there is an awful lot to take in, but a few of the highlights that I took away from listening so very carefully to Terrence and Megan questioning you was the opportunity that when we think of the terms of Jamaica, Canada, Aruba, Curacao, we think of vacation spots. It's an important lesson to realize that in every place around the world, as our kids learned very early in school, wherever you go, there's always someone Jewish and some Jewish history. And I would encourage you that the next time you ever make a trip and think you're only going for vacation, to please look up the Jewish history. Because almost in every place there are those who survived, those who came even from as early back as the Inquisition, the Sephardic Jewish communities. We have always had a place throughout the Caribbean and beyond, and even in Canada. And the other thing I learned was that Please take note, we were welcomed in for a bit of time but could never stay. And it's an important lesson to realize how we were treated and how we are now today treating others. What is the answer? Well, I think we know that your parents would have liked a different answer, to have been able to make a home where they wanted to be with family, but they had to keep moving, and they are truly an inspiration. And to think that a 9-month-old, and how many infants survived the war? Not very many. So we are so grateful. We feel very lucky. Thank you very much. I know they will be joining us at the Oneg Shabbat. I hope you will go over and say hello and ask a few more questions. Thank you, Mr. Fischel. Thank you. Terrence, Megan, thank you so much.